Hi everyone, welcome to my review of From Russia with Love from 1963. So yes, we certainly are back with a James Bond film to review, and the second in the official franchise. Of course, once again directed by the great Terence Young, and yes, Sean Connery, the legend, returning, of course, a year after Doctor No, and these early Bonds very quickly. They would come out, of course, a year apart. These ones here. Until, of course, that gap between Thunderball and You Only Live Twice. But yeah, this is a film, and of course, spoilers warning. I'll say that now. There will be some plot details, heavy on kind of spoilers in this review. So if you haven't seen this film, certainly recommend it. It's one of the best Bond films, in my opinion, ever made. And then come back to this review. But yes, this is a film. That is extremely popular. Most of the time. This and Goldfinger, often kind of there is a kind of a split between who you preferring From Russia with Love, this film here, and Goldfinger as the best Sean Connery Bond. If not, they're both kind of in contention for the best Bond films, really, among fans, and critics, etc. But yes, of course, this film, just blew me away, particularly on my first full, watch of the series. That was the original, 2017, late 2017 into, 2018 for a few months or so. This was the first actually full watch of the entire series that I've ever done, and there was a couple, that I'd not seen too much. This isn't, one of my most watched Bonds, so it was great to kind of, that film really just, this film grew on me so much on that watch. And of course, this time round, once again, it's just kind of blew me away all over again. And it was even more enjoyable. It's even more just thrilling. And this film, once again, just reminding me what I already knew, really, for me at least, on that first full watch of the series, that this film is one of the best, purest Bond films ever made, really. And not only that, and this kind of goes to that kind of top 6 or so Bond films. For me, just not only one of the best Bonds, but one of the best films ever made, full stop. And I think this is just a perfect masterpiece. That's my opinion. I think this film is absolutely stunning. It's kind of it's not even much point to kind of compare it to Doctor No, because it's not just a sequel that kind of is better in every way, for me at least. And that's not disregarding Doctor No. That's a great film. I love that film so much, but it's kind of so different, actually, and so much better, in different elements, to another level, that it kind of just, there's not really much point in kind of comparing it too much, because I just think this film goes to that, to such a height, that it's one of the most sophisticated kind of action thrillers that I've ever seen, and certainly one of the most enjoyable. This film, I love this film so much, that it is, it's, at least at the moment, it is currently in my top, 100, really, that mark. That's how much I love this film. Yes, indeed. That's how far I'd go. I think this is just one of the greatest masterpieces, and this is certainly going to get an increased rating to what I gave it last time, because, as well, my tears were different then and stuff. But this film, just from the get-go, of course, is a flat-out masterpiece, in my opinion. You've got Doctor No, of course, being the first Bond. That film is so great, but of course, this film here and Goldfinger are the ones that really, kind of formed the actual, the kind of skeleton of the franchise. Goldfinger is the one that was the truest, in the sense of being, the first in the franchise, in the sense of it was the first, fully realised franchise Bond. Just in my opinion, I don't think, this one is quite, it seems there in the way it kind of is carried through in all the other Bonds, but at the same time, it's almost, just as much as Goldfinger, kind of this Bond film that kind of, has all the elements there. And I'm not going to say that this is, not as good as Goldfinger, because actually, here's a review, of course. Some of you may not know, this is actually my favourite Sean Connery Bond film, and I do think it is actually better than Goldfinger, in my opinion. I think Goldfinger, of course, is more of a kind of blockbuster franchisey film. It's more of a kind of Bond film. It's maybe it feels more like Bond than this. In the sense that all the elements are there. It's definitely more silly, more humorous in that sense. It's got the kind of the elements that you would see in most Bond films, and when you think of Bond, I think it's one of the ones, maybe the two or three, or maybe even the one that I think is the most Bond-like in many regards. I'm not saying it's my favourite Bond, but yes, this film for me is actually a better film, and I do prefer it. It just is more appealing to me. It's a personal preference here. I do think it's just a bit better, and it just kind of it does more for me. In terms of just satisfying elements and constant engagement with this narrative, these characters, and I think this is I'd go as far to say that this is the kind of the possibly the best Bond performance in the history of this franchise. Sean Connery, as you know, some of you, he is my favourite Bond of all time. The best Bond actor to me by far, and also my favourite Bond. He is the legend in my eyes, and I think this film, while not it's not as humorous, of course, as Goldfinger, but of course there is comedy in this film. It's definitely not a full-on, serious film in every regard, but it's the one, it's less silly than, Goldfinger, and kind of going for that humour more, but it is, and in that sense, I just think it's more of a kind of affecting performance, and I think this one for me, it just kind of does it. It just kind of tops the other Bond films, in terms of performances in a particular way. That I think this is just probably the best Bond performance in that sense. I think this is just absolutely stunning. The acting from Sean Connery, we'll just start with saying that this is just something to behold. He was so good in Doctor No, a masterful performance. I'm not denying that, that's for sure. But this film, he just takes it to another level. It just is it's the art of acting. This film. I just look at this film, and I think, it's among the best performances, for me ever, in cinema. And this kind of mix between this kind of, jokey at times, definitely some one-liners in there. There's some kind of moments of humour, of course, and sly kind of attitude. The kind of the smug, perhaps camaraderie, and the kind of charm that he exudes. It's definitely there, but it's also this real, kind of commitment to the role in the way that it's much more of a realised performance, I feel, than Doctor No. And for me, any other Bond film, certainly with the Sean Connerys, I think this is the standout. And this film, of course, the book is set, it's the fifth book by Fleming, of course, and it was before, therefore, Doctor No and Goldfinger, so that's interesting. But of course, you have got, Sylvia Trench actually, in this film again, and it kind of leads over from, that element from Doctor No, and also the actual plot of, the fact that Doctor No was killed by Bond in the first film. And the main plot of this film, we're not going to get heavy into the plot, but of course the main outline, is basically Rosa Klebb is ordered, of course, by number one, referred to, who we basically know is, of course, Blofeld. He is basically he's not shown, his face isn't shown, in this series for a while, of course, as we know. But yes, he is the one with the cat, of course, referred to as number one. But yes, he orders, of course, Rosa Klebb to helm this mission to kind of get revenge. And also, of course, get hold of this Lecter device, of course, that they want to get. And they do this, a series of manoeuvres, which is just really geniusly done. And yes, basically Bond is used, throughout the film to obtain this device. And then, of course, Donald Grant, played by Robert Shaw, yes, indeed. Really, for me, the main villain of the film, the one that I really think of as, the villain of the film. He's throughout most of it, and he's in the background protecting Bond. This is just so good. He protects Bond until he obtains, the device, and then, of course, he tries to eliminate Bond. As we know, eventually meeting his end, at the hands of this. One of the best fistfights in the history of cinema, in my opinion. And yes, Bond is played, but also the Bond girl, played by Daniela Bianchi, and she's Titania Romanova, and also referred to mainly as Tanya in the film, and she is basically played as well, without knowing it really, to play Bond. It's very intricate, this film. Much more compelling plot than most Bond films to me, and you've got this kind of ploy to put the Russians and the British against each other. It's kind of outlined in that wonderful metaphorical kind of scene, symbolic nature there with the fish. Isn't that just a genius way of kind of summing up the main mission here, and the actual kind of objective here is to kind of play them off, and then at the end, come in, that is just brilliant. Spectre, this organisation, is just, in this film, I think it really is just portrayed in such a menacing way, such a kind of sly way. It really is perfect cinema, this, and just compare it to, at least in my opinion, to the film Spectre. I just think that wasn't effective, really, and this film, it's so much better in the way it's done, for example, to a film like Spectre, and I just think the way it's treated, it's just so, there's an intensity to this film like no other really within the series, actually, and I think there's something really scary about this film, the menacing, the atmosphere, it takes so much as well from past films, which we'll get to in a minute, but of course this film just has so much kind of elements here that basically in every Bond film in some way, more or less, of course, and Goldfinger streamlined that in some regards, not insulting that film at all. I love that film, it's one of my favourites again, but yeah, this film does it in more of a kind of subtle way, perhaps, the elements of Bond, and also in a way that is less, as I say, less kind of comedy-esque, than Goldfinger, but of course the elements here are just, are so established so well. You have this pre-title sequence, which of course we didn't have in Doctor No. You have, of course, the Spectre training exercise. What a great moment, a great way to open the film. Robert Shaw, of course, revealed there, as our main, for me anyway, the main villain, really, antagonist of the film, and of course he's the one that emerges as the ultimate kind of agent here, and he's the one that's sent to be involved in this mission to eventually take out Bond and get this device, of course, the Lecter device, which is kind of treated as a MacGuffin, and that word comes to mind, of course. This film is one of the Bond films. All of Bond really is kind of, and this is something that's always a talking point. All of Bond is kind of influenced in some way by Hitchcock. Of course, for me, one of the best filmmakers of all time, but of course North by Northwest is the one that really, for me anyway, inspired the kind of style and certain elements, especially in this film. Doctor No, of course, as well, and Goldfinger, but this film is for me the most Hitchcockian. You could say it's kind of 50-50 kind of Hitchcockian Bond, and the kind of merging here, I think is perfect, while also kind of just becoming, this true franchise, this and Goldfinger. It's such a unique film, it does take a lot of elements, of course, from certain Hitchcock films. North by Northwest is one that actually, the helicopter scene, for example, is kind of a nod and a kind of continuation of this. The crop duster scene in North by Northwest, if you've seen that film, one of my favourites, and of course many different things here. The villain, of course, and the side villain, the henchman, if you will, and all these elements. There's something about this film that's just so pure in the way it's kind of, it's a Bond film, but it's also inspired by these classic thrillers, adventure films perhaps, romances, of course, and I just love this film. It's a film that, it's just so enjoyable throughout. It's a film that just is so pure in its storytelling, and the way it kind of uses the train in the centre of the film as well, like a Hitchcock. A Hitchcock film, a few of his films did, to kind of escalate this plot, narrative, to build momentum, to kind of keep it claustrophobic perhaps, and to really build for the tension. Of course, you've got that fist fight, near the end of the film, of course, which kind of ends this whole kind of sequence, the train sequence, of course, and it really is just an epic way to kind of finish this sequence, the kind of majority of the middle of the film, really, and then of course you've got the final action scenes and the kind of culmination of Rosa Klebb, who is brutally killed, and it's just there's something about this film, as I say, in its intensity, it's just so effective. The atmosphere, the use of locations, the style, all these, kind of almost Dutch angles, these shots, really build this atmosphere, this kind of uneasy feel, and just the way that this organisation Spectre, is revealed, in this film, and kind of developed as well. Rosa Klebb is just one of the great characters, really, side characters in a Bond film for me, and just the performances across the board. There's something about this one, that really. Even the way that these enemies move, around this, amongst the buildings, perhaps, the architecture. There's something about this film where every single movement, every gesture, every kind of piece of dialogue, perhaps, from the enemies, of course, within this film, is so, so atmospheric, so kind of intense. There's an intensity about this in every single regard. Relating to the enemies, to Spectre itself, that's so felt, it's so believable. It's got its comedy in the film, but it's the one of the Bond films actually that's the most, you could say, the most atmospheric of all of the films, and it's so intense. It's so on the edge of your seat, throughout, really, and constantly for me, involved in this narrative, so absorbing. This is just one of the best, kind of. Stories, really, in a Bond film, in the way it's treated, the attention to it, the commitment, I feel, to the actual narrative, really works in the end. And it's a film that's not as kind of focused on the comedy as many of the Bond films, but it's actually more funny than most of them, because it's more effective comedy, and just better directed, I feel, than so many Bond films. And at the same time, it's also much more investing, just as a film, as a piece of cinema, as of course a romance, thriller, action film, spy film. You really feel, this kind of element, this stealth element, while also being an action film, just the right doses of action, and every action scene is absolutely masterful in my opinion. And of course, we mentioned the romance. Of course, this character, this agent, of course, Tanya, played by Daniela Bianchi, and just a wonderful performance, wonderful character here, beautiful, of course, and just one of the great things about this film is the way that she's introduced before she meets Bond. She's built up as this character, an actual, a human, character here, and one who's kind of torn, between this, in this mission. She has her doubts. You can see this, and great acting, of course, by Bianchi, but you have this kind of setup, and the relationships are so masterfully set up. The kind of hierarchy here within the organisation, once again, of course, Rosa Klebb, the way she kind of intimidates. There's some really interesting moments going on here. This interaction. Early on, of course, it's set up so wonderfully. She's built up, and then she comes into contact with Bond. Quite far into the film, she's not into. Interacting really with Bond, at least, after the 45-minute mark, really. But you also have Kevin Bay, and he is just such an enjoyable character. It really is unbelievable. This is just one of the most charming, kind of jolly characters in a Bond film. And this is the thing. It's a very, very serious film compared to some of the Bonds, but it is also, at the same time, one of the most charming films in the series. And it's this one that really feels, it's just a very, very basic word, but it's just lovely, in its way its characters are presented. There's an ease to it. There's also an intensity, but this character of Karen Bay, is one that's just very, very outgoing, charming, of course. It's so enjoyable, seeing, him and Bond together, of course, throughout most of the first half of the film, and into that, after that, first half, of course, and until he meets his end, on that train. He never makes it off, that train there, and of course, as I've said on my previous review of this, it's a death, in this film that really sums up, Bond, Bond films when they can be human, truly have human, reactions, just moments that really actually very moving, and this character was such a presence. Of course, Karen Bay, and so likable, so charming, so funny. Kind of bumbling, of course, and just an innocent character. And the relationship, of course, was so enjoyable. But his character, when he dies, there's this kind of moment where Bond, he touches, him on the back, and then of course just that gesture there. After that as well, it's just really really moving, and it just shows this actual. Yes, this character can be cold and ruthless, but again, he can be, human as well. And this response just kind of sums it up more than most films. Really, in the series, of course, you have On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is really, for me, something else as well. We'll get to that one. But yes, you have Casino Royale, and you have all these films, and this film as well. I put that in the same kind of category as them films, of course. Just in the way that this is just so human, and so kind of natural in its response to different moments in the film, and this reaction is just so felt, and very very tragic moment. This is kind of very poetic film as well, in the way, of course, as I mentioned, the way that this Bond girl is presented. This character of Tanya, the way that she's torn, and she kind of flips between the different sides here. Eventually, of course, joining Bond, and for me, one of the most pleasing final acts, and just endings in a film, really. The way it came together, it's one of them endings you can just clap at, really. Just so pleasing, to see here. It's so satisfying. Again, not taking itself too seriously in the ending. It's a very, of course, comedic, moment as well. You have this kind of Sean Connery, doing this kind of nod to the opening credits. It's just amazing, with the hand, and throwing the film reel away, and then of course, seeing off screen, obviously the characters interacting there, and then of course the credits, and just wonderful. Getting away on the boat there, and it's an ending that just pleases me so much. But this character, this Bond girl, of course, Tanya, she really is just such a complex character, and it's definitely a film that is, this is very much like Hitchcock films as well. Notorious. That's one that is definitely comparable to as well. If you've seen that film, the plot exactly, is very very in what I'm saying here, is very very similar actually, and has some moments in this film that are very very comparable to these kinds of films. But yes, the way that this character is so complex, and I get so invested in this character. I love the performance. I love the seductive nature of this film. It's a film that is truly sincere in its romance. It's a really, really romantic film. It's just, it's just one of the many reasons why I take this over Goldfinger personally. But both films, are absolutely legendary. So it doesn't really matter. But this film just does it for me in these categories. It's such a thrilling film. It's got its comedic moments. The action is some of the best in the series, and the romance is one of the most charming, in its presentation, absolutely, and the way it's, just enough screen time with these characters throughout the film. Although she isn't brought into the film, until later on, until at least, of course, the first 45 minutes, in terms of the interaction with Bond, she is, despite that, she's so, the romance is so enjoyable and so kind of built up instantly, to the point that it doesn't matter if she's not in the kind of first act, with this romance with Bond, but it just comes together so wonderfully, and the scenes, of course, on the train, it's kind of this rom-com, it's just so enjoyable, and in this classic vein that I just much prefer, so much, to modern romance. It's just so enjoyable, so charming, the innocence to it, the kind of, and just the kind of the enjoyability of this, really, is just so compelling, and so pleasing. It really really is, of course, and just the beauty of this film, in general, the romantic feeling. John Barry once again working on the score here, and for me this is one of the best in the series. Absolutely, the way that kind of the music is used, moments in the film, and of course the Bond theme once again, the way it's used, I think even better than Dr. No in the kind of uses. The use in the background scenes, for example, when Bond is walking through, you know, and he's checking out his hotel room. That's just an epic moment. You know, it's playing and it's just used in the right way. At different moments, and of course, it's not, you know, an action scene, but it's so well used. You know, but the kind of score itself, you know, in different moments is also very, very romantic, as well as being epic. And you know, this John Barry score is just so wonderful. The editing as well, you know, combine that, you know, just wonderfully edited, this film. The locations, you know, Istanbul, of course, is one of the locations in the film, and it's just so, the way this film is shot, it's beautiful. You know, of course, at the same time, it's been very, very intense. You know, kind of like a noir film at times. You know, the angles, perhaps, and just really so thrilling, so kind of on edge. You know, but also so beautiful. The way the architecture is captured, it's kind of this intensity combined with this beauty. It really is wonderful in its cinematography, of course, and the music, and just in general the editing. It's just beautiful. It really, really is. It's got these transition scenes. You see, of course, the map as well, the way they're kind of progressing. You know, which is one of the things of Indiana Jones, which of course came essentially from Bond. But yes, you know, you've got this. All these elements, you know, in this film just make for such a kind of romantic and uplifting experience, at the same time as being a truly emotional film in terms of Bond, and really just such an investing narrative. The way they kind of flesh out this character of Bond, you know, it's genius in my opinion. Sean Connery is an absolute legend in this film. You know, this is an unbelievable performance. You know, to the point of, it is one of the 100 best, absolutely, I think, that I've ever seen. You know, that is some feat, but I'd go that far. I think this is just one of the best in cinema. He knows how to do every single gesture in this film to a T. You know, he pulls it off. You know, to watch this film, you know, just the performance alone is to kind of, it's to witness magic. Really, you know, this is when you get such good acting, you know, for a character that's flawlessly written, you know, in this film, of course, surrounded by character interactions to bring all the traits out. You know, he's this ruthless guy, you know, this physical guy. Sean Connery is this, of course, tough guy, and he brings this toughness, this ruthlessness, but this charm in the particular combination that just makes for a perfect performance, in my opinion, and just. You know, this performance is just one of the best in cinema. And speaking of performances, you know, Robert Shaw, you know, of course, his famous role, you know, is basically Jaws, you know, as Quint. But you know, this film, wow, this film, you know, he is absolutely stunning in this film. You know, when he does actually have, you know, more involvement in, you know, interactions, of course, eventually with Bond. It's one of the best scenes really in cinema. We have that train scene, of course. The dialogue, you know, it's just so good. It's so investing. The editing there, just in that, you know, in that room there, in that kind of part of the train. You know, the way the film is blocked. You know, the blocking there, the staging. You know, the kind of build up before that, and you know, the kind of placement of this scene in the film, and the dialogue, the acting. And then, of course, that kind of fist fight, you know, afterwards makes one of the best sequences that I've ever witnessed in cinema, and it really is just, you know, really in many regards, the kind of standout moment of the film. The stuff on the train, you know, it's just all completely, you know, so absorbing, so intense, so enjoyable. You've got the rom-com kind of elements there, the charming romance, the way they interact, but not really, you know, taking itself fully seriously. It's got the comedy in there, you know, but it's also something I get fully invested with. You know, I really care and root for this romance so much, getting attached to these characters, and luckily in the end they do, of course, go off, you know, together. Of course, she doesn't die in the film, but yes, you know, such a kind of a great use of villains, you know, in the film. Robert Shaw, you know, as Grant is such a menacing character. I think this interaction, you know, with Bond, this pairing here, Robert Shaw, Sean Connery, you know, when they're talking on the train, of course, in that particular scene, I think it's one of the most riveting, intense, and just wowing moments of dialogue in cinema. It really, really is. I can't understate that. I think, you know, definitely this is just masterful dialogue, masterful masterful cinema. It really is so unbelievable. This film blew me away even more. This time round. It's just a thriller. In the sense of the highest order. It's one of the best films ever made. Rivals so many thrillers. Quite a few Hitchcock films. In my opinion, not his very best tier films, but it's one of his. It's one of the best films ever made, in my opinion, and it does rival many thrillers, out there. It's just got all these elements, to make for such a great thriller. It's also something that the plot is so involving, in my opinion. Again, it is a MacGuffin, used here, but it's something at the same time it never kind of takes over. These characters, the development, of course, the interactions, the way they react, of course, to different moments in the film. Example being that death of Karen Bay, or the kind of reveals, of course, to Bond, of course, of this character of Tanya, and her intentions. But again, a very confused, very complex character. Again, she is torn, and in the end, she does, of course, help Bond, and she does, of course, end up with Bond in the end. And the thing I love about many different Bond films, yes, mostly, there are exceptions. The Bond girl is different for each film. It's Bond films like this where it doesn't really matter. It's kind of its own thing. It fits into the franchise, into the kind of mythology, into the world building, which is masterful, of course, in my opinion, in this film. But it also is standalone. It's kind of, in some regards, it's contained. It's its own thing, and just allows for something you can watch and get all the fulfillment of this narrative, these characters, of course. But again, it doesn't matter the fact that Bond will end up with many different partners, of course, throughout the series, and it's just so wonderful to do that. It's very hard to kind of pull that off, of course. And, in between different films, things lead over, of course. But again, it feels like it's its own thing. Also being part of this legendary series, and some of the best action scenes in this film. Some of the best uses of music, and just for me, quite possibly the finest acting performance of a Bond ever, and that's something else. You've got Daniel Craig, of course, in Casino Royale. That's one that's really up there. You've got, of course, Goldfinger, Dr. No, absolutely. You've got many different Bond kind of portrayals, but I think this one, for me, could be the kind of ultimate and purest, that's for sure, Bond performance. And yes, this film, in every act, is just so enjoyable. It's so kind of flawlessly written. It's so tense. The way it's shot, the way it's directed by Terence Young, just kind of refining, but really just filmmaking here is in another league, really, to Dr. No. Again, not much point comparing because it's completely different, but it's something that really is something else, and the way that it kind of took these elements of Dr. No and just upped them so much more, to the point of high art. It really is, of course. And you've got one of the kind of staples, Q, and of course he is in Dr. No, essentially, but at the same time not really. I kind of said that in the first review there, but Desmond Llewelyn, actually appears here for Q for the first time. This is when Q, as we know it, really came into play, and of course Goldfinger again, kind of refining that to the point where it's really what it would be, pretty much in every Bond film. There are exceptions, of course, especially now, but that's the one that really just kind of refined the elements in this in particular ways. But this is the first one really where Q, I think. The Q, as I know it, kind of in the truest sense, definitely the character being realised fully came into play, and that's something else. Desmond Llewelyn, the best for me, the best actor that played Q, and just one of the most, I'm sure many would agree, one of the most enjoyable, charming side characters, in cinema really, and just I think the use of gadgets in this film, this is a film that kind of. It doesn't go too far at all with the gadgets. It's kind of very grounded. More of a thriller, of course, more grounded thriller than the next films, in the franchise. But the gadgets in this film are they're very, very. There's a few gadgets in this film. There's not, loads, as we know, but the way that they're treated, this is the difference here. This is why, this is so investing. The actual gadgets themselves, are different, are used in such an investing way. Where you kind of you get briefed, of course, by Q, like in many of the different Bond films. But I find, in some of the Bond films, especially later on, you kind of I didn't really fully get behind or be like wowed by the kind of gadgets in the way they're presented, and it's all kind of subtle in some regards, but again, through the editing and stuff and the way that it's kind of done, revealed, but it is just the way that this is a few gadgets, but the way they're kind of focused on, is just so perfect, and the way that it comes into play, in one of the key moments of the film, that's how the gadgets are used, how they're kind of treated. They're not kind of bombastic, insane gadgets, which is fine, per se. But I think this is the one where it's treated so well, and it's got this kind of this focus, but not overly focusing on the gadgets, and the way that they're kind of used is genius. The way they're kind of used in that train sequence there, and the briefcase, of course, the knife, and the kind of the way that the opening of the case, something that's just is so tense. Every time it's just so tense in the way that you kind of it's a very particular kind of detail. The case, the way it opens, it could end in disaster. It's just kind of it's one of these things. Just kind of makes this film so investing and so kind of so enjoyable to watch, and so complex. It's just the simplicity to the gadgets, but the way they're done, the way that kind of elevates this experience, and it's not too far. It's not an invisible car. It's not an invisible car. It's simple, but it's so well done and highly investing. In my opinion, and it's just making for one of the reasons why this is just such a perfect blend of this kind of you could say fantastical, out there kind of action film, campy at times, brilliantly campy, and just definitely comedic, but again, match that with this thriller, this grounded, classic, pure thriller, and you have one of the best films for me in all of cinema. So overall, of course, I absolutely love this film. It means so much to me. It's a film that it's a favourite, for quite a few Bond fans, or at least one of their favourites, kind of thing. And I think, yes, for me, this is definitely one of the very, very best Bond films, and pretty close to that top spot. It just so happens that I do prefer at least one Bond film, to this, and we'll talk about that, of course, in my upcoming reviews. But this film is so special. The pre-title sequence, of course, the opening credits themselves, the ending, of course, with the Matt Monro actual, singing version, coming up there, and of course it is played, on the radio within the film as well. Earlier than that, the Matt Monro singing, of course, but just the way that this score is used, is so wonderful. It's kind of this romantic film. It's quite a sad film at times. In different places, it's got so much mastery in terms of world building. And just enhancing these different elements of Doctor No, but really just creating other elements that would, of course, lead, feed into Goldfinger, where that really truly began this actual franchise, as we see James Bond. But this is the one that I think for me is the finest outing for Sean Connery, and as I say, possibly the best Bond performance of all time, and a wonderful film, just a one that really just blows me away, and really is a real favourite of mine. It's just the action throughout the film, as I've mentioned, the actual writing to the film is treated with such sophistication. Again, it's got the cheeky moments, it's got the kind of Sean Connery comedy in the film, and but again, it never goes too far. But at the same time, it's so the balance of this is so key, and it's just so investing. It feels so real, but again, dreamy, atmospheric, kind of in a fantastical vein, and it's just a beautiful film. It really elevated by the actual filmmaking, and of course, but everything in the film, the actual acting, is stunning. Of course, Sean Connery, I've mentioned enough. Of course, what I think of that. Daniela Bianchi is absolutely beautiful, wonderful performance. Really brings the emotion to the character, but again, the playfulness to the character. This is definitely one of the most playful romances, but again, it's one of the most investing. She's definitely one of the best Bond girls by far for me, personally, and I think Robert Shaw is masterful. He really just adds so much to the film, the atmosphere, the kind of dread, the kind of charm as well, from his character. You've got this just unforgettable kind of triangle here, on that train sequence. His kind of infiltration there. The scene, of course, of the table, the drinks, of course. That moment there, it's just so good. The storytelling to this film is so rich, and just a beautiful film. It's simplicity to the film, but again, the complexity within the characters, the human response, especially from Bond. Connery just brings so much humanity to the role, but again, ruthless, cold attitude at times. Really, absolutely mind-blowing fist fights. The train sequence, of course. Absolutely stand out. This is another level, really, for action of a fight scene, and it's just perfect storytelling in my eyes. The way the characters, the minor characters, are kind of treated. They all seem important. In the film, there's never a wasted moment. It's just, it really is a wonderful film. And last time round in my last review, it got into my plus tiers. It got a tier 3. That's of course because my plus tiers were very, very different then, and it's adjusted massively since, quite a bit since, 2 years ago, of course. It's of course. It's very, very different now, and also at the same time, it has actually risen a little bit in my estimations. This film, so it's kind of, it's very, very close, to another Bond film as well, for my enjoyment. So it's just, it really has grown on me. At the same time as my plus tiers, have clearly massively adjusted since I reviewed, this film originally. It's not tier 3. It's not 100% plus tier 3 at all. It's 100% plus tier 1. That's how good this film is to me. This is one of my top, 100 films really of all time, and it's just therefore one of my absolute favourites in cinema. A tier 1 indeed. That's how far I go. I think this is one of the best films ever made, and it really could be. I can certainly understand it if this is people's picks for the best Bond, because what a film it is. It's just, there's something about this one that's really so atmospheric. It's so engaging, so enjoyable. You've got Moneypenny, even better than she was in Doctor No. Lois Maxwell, Bernard Lee, so good in this film again. Desmond Llewelyn, actually, his first appearance as Q. You've got everything essential really here. It just so happens that a couple of instances really where Bond has, it's been better, than this, but really it's just one of my favourites. It's the one that brings real joy. It's a romantic film. It's got its tragic moments. It's a human Bond. It's a real kind of complex human Bond within this franchise. Also got kind of mixing in the action, the comedy there, but never going too far. Never going over the top. It's got its campy moments. It's of course it's got this charm to it. It's got the kind of slightly over the top moments, but not in a bad way at all, and not in a way that kind of detracts from the actual sophistication of the film. The subtleties, of course. Such a an artistic Bond film. This one, it's really treated with such passion and respect for the character, while also being its own thing. It fits wonderfully within the franchise. Very interesting as well. Of course, but it really does. It's its own thing. It's its own film, and it's got such a progression and momentum to the narrative. It's got such enjoyable side characters and primary characters. But Bond Girl, of course, being one of the best in my opinion. It's just certainly one of my favourite romances really in the film, and just you know, the way the film escalates, of course the pre-title sequence, all the way to the ending shot. You know, just what a legendary film. You know, a mythic film. The way it kind of portrays Spectre, and the way it kind of has this breezy feel. These early Bond films have, you know, because they're not overly trying with certain elements. They're just great filmmakers. They're just great, a great team behind this who just, you know, really put the passion into this. You know, never breaking the commitment of these first three Bond films. You know, never branching off to do things. You know, that I feel that they kind of play into different other elements. You know, just really focusing on bringing this character and this creation to the screen, and it's just this kind of naturalism, but real mastery. You know, I think the '60s Bonds, you know, is absolutely, for me personally, the best decade of you know, of the franchise. You know, consistently just, you know, maybe one exception, consistently great. You know, and just these first three films, you know, really, wow, so stunning. Of course, From Russia with Love being my favourite Connery film. You know, the Bonds, and you know, it just really is. Just so happens to be, you know, masterful people involved in this. You know, these individuals coming together to create something really, really special. You know, this is the one for me that really stands out as for me the finest, you know, purest Sean Connery film within this franchise. And yes, there we have it. Of course, going once again through this this part of the set, and next, of course, Goldfinger. So, you know, I can't wait to talk about that. We'll be watching that in 2 days, actually. We'll be watching that. Well, actually, it is now Saturday. I talked into midnight. I'm going through. So yes, tomorrow I will be watching Goldfinger again, and you know, look forward to reviewing that. Talking to you in the comments about that. But you know, this film for me, it's definitely the best. Just my personal opinion. Everyone has their own rankings. It's definitely the best. You know, Sean Connery Bond, and you know, I can't wait to watch Goldfinger again. But this film, you know, From Russia with Love, is just, it really is a special film in my opinion, and one of the very, very best Bond films. You know, that's what I personally feel, and you know, it could be, you know, it could be the purest, you know, just overall Bond film, along with another one. I'll get to. You know, it just really is one of my favourites. Easy top 5. You know, Bond film for me. And yes, just a complete joy, you know, just thrill to watch from start to finish. The locations, the adventure feel, you know, the romance, caper, comedy, you know, just ruthless intensity. The way Spectre is portrayed is absolutely masterful, and just one of the most legendary films, you know, for me in cinema. We'll end it there, and yes, next up is Goldfinger, 1964. Then, of course, we'll go to Thunderball, and we'll kind of discuss these films, as I say, you know, in the comments, and I just can't wait to watch all these films again. Not every single film, maybe, you know, Die Another Day and stuff, but we'll get to that. But I will be watching all these films again. But just, you know, talking about this franchise, I can't wait to kind of really get into the meat, you know, of this series. But, you know, this '60s Bonds films, for me, you know, it's the overall best decade. Definitely, I take this one. There's so much greatness here, and this is no exception. Really, really is. And yes, From Russia with Love is one of my favourite films of all time. And as always, of course, you know, tell me your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of this film? How would you rank it? You know, within this legendary series, this massive, diverse, you know, different styles, different takes on Bond, of course, different tones. You know, within the kind of runtime of this franchise. You know, so of course rankings will be very, very different. You know, I've never really seen the same Bond ranking. But yeah, you know, tell me what you think on this film. You know, all opinions are welcome. Respectful opinions and discussions. You know, on this series. It's always great to discuss. And you know, what do you think of From Russia with Love? What's your favourite Connery film? Or favourite, you know, Bond, you know, film that Connery appeared in, and just favourite Connery film, you know, favourite Bond films, and all this kind of discussion would be great to kind of get into, of course. And yes, what do you think of this film? And yeah, I can't wait to, of course, talk about the rest of the series, particularly, of course, Goldfinger, you know, in a day now. And yes, it's been a great pleasure to watch this film again. A real delight in this franchise, and a real sophisticated but playful, you know, experience within cinema, and yes, that is my opinion on this film. Tell me your thoughts, and as always, thanks for watching my review.